making the graphing form of the parabola from the general form, we need to first step is to remove the common factor from the first two terms. So we kind of ignore this plus 11 and we focus on these first two terms. Okay, so I'm going to highlight those first two terms. And we're going to factor out the common factor from those first two terms, because to make the square, it's much easier to make the square just using the x squared rather than trying to do it with a 2x squared. So that's the first thing, factor that out. We want to then decide what number is going to complete this square. Okay, and so we're going to make that square with a plus 9. So basically it looks like this. We factor out the 2. Once we do that, we have our x squared. Okay, and we need to symmetrically distribute the negative 6x's. So we need to, since we need to make a square, make it symmetrical, we need to put half the x's here and half the x's there. Okay, and then what ends up happening is then we need to complete the square with that piece right there. Okay, so we end up, that piece is going to be, well, we know that that's going to be x, that's going to be minus 3, and that's going to be x and minus 3. Okay, again, it has to be symmetrical, so it has to be the same on both sides. And to complete that square then, we take negative 3 times negative 3, or basically half this middle, because we half it like this, and we square it to get the 9. Now, the problem with this is, we've now introduced a plus 9, which was never there. So here we've now completed the square, but we have not balanced the equation. So we've broken one of the basic, most important rules of math, is we have to keep it balanced. So what we have to do then is we have to balance off that plus 9. Well, we added 2 positive 9s, so we have to balance it with a minus 18. Okay, so since it's on the same side of the equation, we're going to balance it on the same side with a negative. So we had 2 positive 9s, we balance it on the same side with a minus 18. And at this point now we're balanced. So all we have to do is just rearrange this so that we have it in our graphing form. So we combine those terms. We then factor that as our perfect square. If we want to take a look at that perfect square that we've made, it's an x minus 3 times x minus 3 perfect square. So there's our x minus 3 square. Okay, and we now have it in our graphing form. So this one now has, we went from this general form where really we just could see it's opening up with a, it's been vertically expanded, it's got a y-intercept, but we don't have indication of the symmetry of the vertex. So what we've then done is done some algebra and we put it into the perfect square form, which allows us to find the vertex, and now we have the graphing form, which is much more convenient to graph. So now we can identify the most important part, which is a vertex at 3, negative 7. Our axis of symmetry is at 3. And the y-intercept, well, we can get the y-intercept from this by plugging in 0, or we can go back to our general form and get our y-intercept of plus 11. Okay, so I'm going to go through this step by step again for this example. This one has just no, it doesn't have a coefficient in front of the x squared, so it's going to be a little bit easier. This really should say y equals. So the first step again is we want to factor out the leading coefficient out of the first two terms. We're going to focus on the first two terms. Okay, so it doesn't have a leading coefficient. So what I'm going to then do is I'm going to set up my completed square. Okay, so here, that's x squared. There's my x squared. Okay, I need to symmetrically distribute the negative 6x's so I can make a square, so it has to be symmetrical. So I'm going to have negative 3x here, negative 3x here. So that's going to be x minus 3, x minus 3. And then to complete that square, I need to take half of the middle, or -3 and -3, and finish off that square. So that's going to be a +9 to complete that square. Now, I'm not balanced at this point, so I have to balance the square, this quadratic off. So I have to balance that with a -9. Okay, I've added one +9, so I have to balance it with one -9. So now that it's balanced, I'm all okay. I'm going to write it in its completed square form. So it's going to be an x minus 3 square, and then -1 when I combine those like terms. There's my graphing form. I can now identify the vertex. The vertex is going to be at 3, -1. Okay, this has an axis symmetry at 3. The y-intercept is at +8. If I want to graph this, this is much easier to graph. 3, -1, and it's going to go up in this way. And you can show that it's got a y-intercept of +8 if you like. But it gives, once we have the vertex, that's really the most important part. Okay, now it has a regular expansion, so we probably can find some other points here. But other than that, this is exactly what we're looking for.